My name is Ambika Vishwanath, and I'm the founder director of Kuber9 Initiative, and it gives me great pleasure to moderate this panel. This panel is about women leadership in the fourth industrial revolution. And as is the conversation going around the globe today for the last few years now, is about increasing women's presence, leadership, and voices, perspectives in all spheres of policymaking and global governance. So what does that mean when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and what does that mean when we talk about the future of how we see this Arabian Sea connection, conversation, and collaboration going forward? So what can India and our partners across the ocean, across the Arabian Sea do together to make this happen in a realistic fashion? So I'm going to start here by asking Nujaina and Najla, I hope I'm saying that correctly, given that both of you come from respective areas of governance in your countries, as to what role the state institutions can play. Now, we all know that the number of women in positions of power globally is very small compared to the number of men. Of course, while this is growing, it's not only about numbers, but it's also about agency, it's about power, it's about the ability to exercise that agency, right? So we can have any number of women up in these positions of power, but if they can't exercise that same kind of agency, those numbers mean very little. In India, we have 43% of graduates women in STEM, but that translates only to 26% in the workforce. And in the GCC, it's 35 to 57% graduates, and I apologize, I couldn't find the number of women in the workforce, but it's apparently less than 15%. We also know that less than 1% of funding goes to women's organizations globally. So I want to bring these 2 points to this conversation and then start with both of you as to what state institutions can do to change this. And then I'll come to the rest of the panel with a slight tweak in that very same question. Najla, if I can begin with you.
Actually, if I'm going to speak about the women's situation in the United Arab Emirates, I don't believe that the international statistics will always be applied on our society. We look into women issue a little bit differently than maybe the definition of these statistics that are produced by probably Western values in general. So, and especially during COVID, where we start to see a different approach to these statistics and different problems that were generated by staying at home, for example, in the West, and staying at home in our region. But to come back again to your question about the situation of women in the United Arab Emirates, I believe, since the establishment of UAE and starting by addressing the law and general government policy, there is no any law or code that prevented women from participating. The only barrier was at the beginning is that the whole society is a young society and need development. And if you see the statistics of women, for example, a university graduate is actually in the 70% since 20 years now. Women are more, there are more women university graduate in United Arab Emirates than male university graduate. And the workforce, we saw women in nearly every type of jobs, starting from the political level, ministerial level, ambassadorial. Even we have in the security and military studies, we have Khawla bint al-Azwar since early 90s. Which is we have a lot of UAE women are involved in the military studies since the 90s. Having said that, also in the government and also the structure of the United Arab Emirates, we are more pivoting toward governmental work, but not business. I would say in general for male and female, and especially the field of education and healthcare are mostly dominated by women. If I'm going to look at the national workforce in the United Arab Emirates. I don't believe that, we have a problem there. But if we looked at, for example, in the, as I said, I was in a discussion with the American scholar in gender issue, and apparently they generated statistics where they found that women in workforce suffered during COVID period. But for us, because of the sense of family values, which is higher here in the Eastern culture, I think that was an opportunity for women to be more involved in the workforce. And I believe that, more studies need to be done in this field in our part of the world.
Thank you. And I completely agree that I don't think some of the statistics that are going around, which are more often than not generated in Western countries, apply to all of our countries in this region. We need to generate data and statistics that make sense to us using perhaps some similar, but also an added set of parameters, again, that are more reflective of societies as we have them. Lujaina, the same question to you.
Good evening, Lujaina. I come from the Sultanate of Oman. Here I would like to start my answer by quoting His Majesty, the Sultan Qaboos. He described the woman as the second wing of a bird, and the bird which will take this nation beyond horizon. So by this, I would like to emphasize that in Oman, women have been empowered from early 70s. I can say proudly here that as an Omani woman, we have been the first woman minister in the region. We have been the first ambassador woman in the region. We have been the first parliamentarian in the region. So if this proves anything, it proves that Oman and the Omani government from early 70s have had faith in women. For us, we have been given the tools, we have given the things which will make us grow in Oman. Of course, Oman is a good combination of a conservative society, but it is open-minded where it has to be open-minded. I would like to, even though I would not like to take much of everyone's time, but I would like to showcase myself as an Omani woman here today. Of course, I'm a wife, a happy married wife with 3 daughters. That's one part of my story. But actually, I wear 4 or 5 different caps. I am a parliamentarian. I am a businesswoman. I am the first Omani lady to be elected in the first football association. I had 3, 4. Yes, thank you very much. I had 3, 4 friendship associations. I had one of them, proudly I should say, Oman-India Friendship Association. So what is the secret? What is the secret for a woman to actually revive and grow? I would say 2 things. If she knows to balance her life, balance is a very important thing, because we should not, as mothers, as wives, we should not let our main responsibility, which is our children, actually that be neglected. But at the same time, we have full right to grow. We have full right to be ambitious. And how I do it, I mean, I always believe caring is sharing, or sharing is caring, sorry. So in my organization, I have come with a policy. Each high-level lady manager or a director or a CEO, she is supposed to mentor 2 young Omanis. So by mentoring them, she's responsible to give a proper coaching to her so that one day that young Omani takes her place. So this is how we do it. I'm sorry I took much of your time.
No, that's great. And thank you. I think that's an excellent way to go forward, is this concept of mentorship, which is something that we are all grappling with in India as well. And I know Raji and I have had many conversations about that. Your story is amazing, no doubt, but it's not common, especially if we look at the entire landscape across the GCC and in India. All of us here will probably have somewhat similar stories, but that doesn't translate to the society at large. And we still see a gap between the number of girls who are entering the education system, but then the number of women who are entering the workforce, and that there's a gap over there. And so I'd like to come to you then, Shivali, as to what can we do as countries that cooperate and hopefully will increase cooperation in the education space. We've heard some ideas over there, I mean, throughout the day-to-day. But what can we do there then to hold on to that number so that workforce, the ones entering the workforce from education, increases going forward?
Thank you. I think when we talk about, particularly from the perspective of the 4th Industrial Revolution, I think there has to be more investment with regard to STEM. Because there are these gender stereotypes, every discipline is sort of gendered. So if we look at math, science, engineering, these are supposedly very masculine professions. And you don't have too many women joining, or rather taking these disciplines up. For that matter, I would say even international relations is considered to be a very, quote unquote, a very masculine domain. And therefore, there are very far and few women in this domain. So I think there has to be a sort of change in mindset. And I think this is where MNCs can play a very important role. An example that comes to mind is the L'Oreal Foundation. They, in fact, have been extending, or in fact, they have a program called Women in Science, and they extend very generous scholarships to economically, women who come from economically deprived backgrounds to pursue a career in science. And they also work with national commissions, so it's the UNESCO L'Oreal Prize as well as the Women in Science program. That is one. The second thing, of course, is about automation. Unfortunately, when we talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution, we're also talking about AI, automation, etc. Now, typically, these repetitive jobs that women are engaged in, those are the ones that will be replaced by automation. But that said, automation will also create a new level playing field. So you are going to then rely on human talent. It's not going to be male or female. And I think in the previous session, we heard one of the speakers, and that really caught my attention, is that women are more, I would say, when it comes to creativity, ingenuity, or for that matter, problem solving. These are typically areas that women do very well in. So I think, again, automation is going to, the human talent is going to be far more important than the male-female divide. But that said, women need to show up first. They have to become digitally fluent. Last but not least, just one point is about entrepreneurship. And we need to create those ecosystems for women. And I'm not just talking about startups, I'm also talking about micro enterprises. In fact, during the pandemic, we did see a lot of young women, or I would say women, taking to the internet,
to sell their wares to, these small businesses that cropped up. So that is also a sort of indicator that if given the right sort of ecosystem, women can do it. Finally, the GCC India Connect, I think we share commonalities and, in terms of the cultural ethos. And I think we should stop seeing it from the Western perspective. Because, when we talk about democracy, when we talk about women's empowerment, it's very often from the lens of the West. And I think, the panelists here have said that before I did, that it's high time that we started looking at ourselves for who we are. And this is where I think there is a great connect between the GCC and India in taking these sort of initiatives forward in terms of replicability as well as scalability. Thank you.
I'll take that. Yeah. Great. I think that's lots of good ideas over there, especially more investment from the MNCs. So all of you sitting over here, that's to all of you here. And then people who are listening beyond this, right? How can we bring in, if we're looking at more investment from the GCC into Indian tech companies, is there a way to ensure that that investment is a little bit more inclusive than only picking a certain kind of company to look at for that investment purpose? And I'm going to say that very bluntly, right? Can you ensure that that money is a little bit more widespread in that sense? Raji, I'm going to come to you next. If we have government institutions that help us and the education system is also working towards this, as people who work in the think tank, research, advocacy space, what is our role then over there to ensure that women, and here I say, but women in other sections of society that might not have that kind of access, how can we ensure that they stay in their jobs and then rise up the ranks? And what Lujena was talking about mentorship, I think that's one great idea and way to go forward. But what else can we do in that sense? There's very few women in India who are at very high levels when you look at the think tank and research space. And I haven't studied the numbers in the GCC, but globally also it's very small. So your thoughts on that?
A couple of different things. I would come to that particular question about what we can do. And I think the mentorship is a great point. And I think that's something I've been trying to kind of use as a talking point in many of these kind of conversations, because mentoring is important. But along with that, you also need to see how can we bring women into the leadership position? How many women do we see in leadership position, managerial position, whether it is within the bureaucracy or civil society, think tanks or industry houses and so on and so forth? Where are the women? And I in that sense, I want to just quickly run over some slides I had from a couple of years ago, but I think they still reflect some of the realities even till date. So I think women, by and large, it's a very, I don't think we see it here. These are just kind of reflective of the realities maybe from a few years ago. And my figures are basically US-centric as well. But I do still believe that we don't have to look at US or Western data sets and so on and so forth. But I think in many other parts of the world, when we look around, I think the situation is somewhat worse. And therefore, that is just an indicator of how things are, where women are in terms of the number of women. You initially said about the Indian case, where the number of graduates who pass out of STEM education, for instance, but the number of them who make it to the actual industry or a career in the tech industry, that is still a very small number. And what can we do about that? And I think that's where some of the hashtags, for instance, whether it is equal pay, for instance, or women's empowerment, all of these are important, extremely important, because when I was just looking at the one study from several years ago, they said men go up the career ladder based on potential, whereas women are based on their past accomplishments, in a sense. Men are looked at the base of potential. He shows certain amount of potential, so I want to take him. But when women are being considered for positions, They are looked at in the, from what they have accomplished so far and so on and so forth. And therefore, women's exposure into the tech world, into various professions in this regard, equal pay, for instance, because that's going to determine your future path, for instance. So equal pay as well as women's empowerment, women in tech industry, their role and presence are extremely important. Those things, I don't, and in that sense, I'm glad that Arabian Sea Dialogue for the first time in person, for instance, has actually, does have a panel looking at prominently women in tech or women in the fourth industrial revolution, because I don't think the numbers have changed significantly over the last several decades in a sense. So I think leadership position, how do we change that? How do we get more women in the security, in the leadership and management position so that they can kind of begin to influence? Because most of the time we are told that, you know, technology or hard security issues are very male dominated. Women cannot do it in a sense. And that's been the understanding when I entered the field. In the 90s, for instance, I was almost made to feel that, you know, you getting into the security studies is not something that is going to happen. But I think I began to question myself after a few years. I kind of began to question and kind of made myself, I had the genuine interest. So a couple of things. The other aspect is courage of conviction of what you want to do. If you have the courage of conviction, if you are genuinely interested in the subject, and if you have the courage of conviction, follow your path. The path may be very difficult. There will be men, there will be others who will try to pull you down. And it's happened to me. I can give you a lot of different anecdotal experience in a sense, even in my last 25, 30 years that I've been in this profession. But the fact is that if you have that courage of conviction, you will go a long way, even whether it is a technology field or hard military security and strategic studies field as well.
Thank you, Raji. And we have all, I know, learned a lot from you over the years. So in terms of mentorship, Raji is a great beacon for all of us who work in this space together with her. Jyoti, over to you. In terms of coming from the field of media, and I'll add communication over there, right? What can we do as in that space to put the word out there, right? That this is not anymore, I mean, it never should have been, but not anymore a male-oriented space, that women have a role to play, they have a perspective to offer, they have value to give. So what can the media do to create that kind of narrative out there in this country, but also in terms of how we create our partnerships?
Thank you so much, Ambika, for giving me the last word. And it's just to say again that it's, you know, the sun has set on the Arabian Sea. And I've been a fangirl, I think, half the day just watching the sunset. And it's just been beautiful to be here, courtesy the Observer Research Foundation. It's been fantastic. Now, you talked about the media. And let me just say that I've been a journalist for several decades now, almost all my life. And the one thing that I have learned is actually to go back to basic principles. And you know, when you first become a journalist, what is it that they teach you? 5 questions. Who, what, where, when, and guess what the last question is? Anybody know? Why? So who? Who are the 2 people in this conference who have shaped this conference? Shall I tell you who? Sheikha Najla, and I won't tell you who the second one is, but one is her. And I'll tell you why. Because in the first session and the second session this morning, there was a lot of talk about how the US in the region has all these negative connotations, is not a role model to follow. And while I would agree with each one of those comments, here's what the Sheikha said. She said, listen, guys, the US is here to stay. The GCC-US agreement, think about it, look at it. Right down to the radar systems, they tell you what to do and what not to do. She was the one who basically exposed the hypocrisy of a lot of what people were saying. And I think you have to applaud what she said this morning. And then you had Raji. What I'm saying to you is that women are not afraid to speak. You know, Shivali said earlier, women have to show up. And that's more than half the battle. We have to show up wherever we are, on the football field, like Lojena is doing in her country. And, listen, we have so many roles to play. Mother, sister, daughter, journalist, so many things. Now, the point is, why can't we play all these roles? But, if somebody is going to say to me, no, listen, we don't like the fact that India and the US are part of I2U2 and that India has to be a little bit more withdrawn from this, and we shouldn't be so allied to the Israelis. My point is, India is going to take over the presidency of the G20, and look at the membership of the G20. You have China, you have Russia, you have the US, and you have the UK, and you have the European Union, and now there's going to be, as invitees, you have the UAE and Oman, and so the Saudis are already there. And we can talk about how so much is changing in all our countries. Look at what's happening in India. I mean, in India, the Constitution of India, as you know, Ambika, and as I'm sure a lot of people know in the audience, guarantees equality to men and women, right? And I'm not here to talk about what the Gulf states do, but look at the Gulf states. I've seen, my brother and my sister-in-law live in Dubai, and I've seen how things have changed over the years. And more power to the women who live there, and more power to the men who are feminists. And by the way, if the men are not going to be feminists in the Gulf, then I'm afraid, okay, I won't complete that sentence.
Okay. Thank you, Jyoti.
I'm going to...
Yeah.
But I'm going to end this by just saying that I think all of us are here to support our sisters in Iran. All of us in India and all of us in the Gulf. Iran is not a member of the GCC. India and Iran have very old relations, and I'm sure the Arabs and the Iranians or the Persians have a very strong relationship too, in their own way. But when we see what's going on, and I think it's about choice. You want to wear a hijab? Wear it. You don't want to wear a hijab? Don't wear it. But I think as people, we have to show up and we have to say what we want to say, whether or not you like it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jyoti. That's great. And I think we've talked a lot today about the different kind of connections that we could have between India and the GCC across the Arabian Sea on tech, on climate, on potentially building electricity lines under the sea, which are not very feasible, and numerous other areas. And I think this is a really important connect that we're sometimes forgetting. There is so much going on in the positive side of women's empowerment, education, and various other fields in these countries. How can we put that together, package it, and advertise it as examples to learn from and experiences for other countries that may or may not be in this same space? Of course, there's a lot, we have to still go a lot further, but there's a lot that we can learn from what's already been done, and I think that's an idea over there as well. Any questions before I come back to our wonderful panelists over here?
In terms of inclusivity, I think there is more for our region to think about, particularly in the mosaic that it is made of in terms of religion, ethnicity, roots, etc. We have to think how those contributions, investment, can be also spread and reach out to others. And it's not just in India. We have the same in the Arab countries. And the issue which we kind of not touched upon the whole day, that really matters in the Gulf and to the Arab countries, are that of the Muslims in India, for example. To what extent, what percentage do they make of the poorest of the poor in India? What are the strategies? To what extent do they have the freedom, if they want to wear the hijab, wear it, or if they don't want, they don't, These are issues that would be great that we hold the mirror for ourselves and make sure that the internal cracks don't get any wider, so that we can work globally together.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a great point, actually. And I just, before I come back to the panel, there's a whole conversation happening globally on what a feminist foreign policy might be, right? At Kuber9 Initiative, and I'm shamelessly going to plug some of our work over here right now because I have the mic and I can, is that we've looked at what an inclusive foreign policy could be, right? So it needs to go beyond just that conversation about more women. Of course, that's important. But how do we then expand on that conversation, especially in a country like India and in the Gulf, to look at issues of religion, caste, class, socioeconomic background, and make that policy, whether it's foreign policy, domestic, or any cooperation-related policy, much wider. So in that sense, then I would urge you all to think about as to how do we take the lessons of what we have learned here about women and empowerment and going stronger and forward to bring that into other areas then of sections of society that might not have that same kind of access, right? And yes, I will come to you, Jyoti, but Raji had her hand up first, so over to her.
So quickly, I think Shivali was the one who was making that point about earlier, the new algorithms and so on and so forth that are being developed, for instance, in the artificial intelligence sector domain. But one point is that we are also carrying forward some of the biases from the past. As such, women in the past industrial revolution we haven't seen much of a change in the role that women have played in the previous industrial revolutions when you look at it. And I'm not entirely sure that in the current revolution that we are looking at, that we are. Because if you are looking at, for instance, we are using the same data sets from the history. And the algorithms are developed and trained on those same old data sets, which means that we are also carrying forward some of the biases from the past. And I have another colleague who have actually been doing some work on the AI and how the military, for instance, military implications of the military side of things. And is that really a woman-friendly sort of algorithm that we are developing? So there are issues even out there. Second aspect is about the digitalization. IT revolution, when it happened, everybody thought this was going to be a level playing field for across the board for women and so on and so forth. But we do see a digital divide. Especially when the pandemic happened, this was particularly stark, whether it is in India, and I was familiar with Southeast Asia because we were doing a study on India and Southeast Asia and Australia, for instance. But I can kind of feel that may have played out in several other regions as well. Women continue to face the digital divide as well. So so digital divide, that continues to be a problem. Perpetuation, so how do we deal with that? That's a serious question in a sense. And second is the biases in a sense. Third point, taking on from what you said about the feminist foreign policy, that's, to me, the first and foremost is, and I think you and I have discussed several times, we've been part of other conversations also, that is, women make the other 50% of the population, they should have a voice. It's as simple as that. Whether they have a feminist foreign policy orientation or a realist policy orientation or a constructivist orientation, that doesn't matter. It is her right to put in her viewpoint, her perspective out there. That is number one. So that the fact that the other 50% of the population needs to have a voice, I think that, to me, is the more important. Feminist foreign policy, of course, is much more inclusive and balanced, but I think there is scope for coexistence of different schools of thought, whether even you talk about foreign policy, security studies, technology and security, and so on and so forth. A very final point is, can we create, that's one of the points that we could think about, for instance. One is to create a network of women, for instance. Maybe this is an India GCC, maybe a good forum. Arabian Sea dialogue, for instance, possibly offers as a good platform for us to create a network of women, maybe start as a virtual network, and maybe we can meet every year, but virtually also keep meeting in order to share the experiences, in order to get women to speak, in order to do the mentorship roles and so on and so forth. So I think we need to think about very innovative ways of kind of doing, sort of encouraging each other, be there for each other, and standing up for one another in a sense.
Shivali, to you, on creating a network between educational institutions in India and the GCC. Yes, no?
Absolutely. I fully support it. And I think the education systems, the education sector has a lot of solutions. And particularly with Raji, I'd just like to pick up on that point is that the biases that we have inherited, I think those need to go. And also creating the next generation of, thinkers, policymakers, etc. But that really needs to happen at the primary school level.
So systems at the primary school level. And then over to you, Lujena, on creating this network and learning from your excellent example of mentorship. One sentence.
Yes, yes, I would go for it because I believe that the same size does not fit all. So we need to complement each other. What is lacking in our part, we will gain it from them. And what is lacking from them, we will support them with.
And Najla, over to you. Yes.
I think for decades we created a certain system which empowered women to a certain level, which is graduating from university. But we didn't create the job opportunity for women also to flourish there. And I think this is, currently we have the opportunity with the technological advancement to empower women, not just on the level of high level, which will be governmental policy that will empower women in high level jobs, but empower her also in the mass possibility of being able to be creative and entrepreneur.
Thank you to this amazing panel. I think we could have gone on for quite a bit, but thank you so much to all of you. And thank you all for listening and paying attention so late this evening.